Om Shri Matre Namaha. Now I am going to discuss about nature versus nurture. This is one of the interesting topic. Prayer. Stapakaya cha dharmasya satya dharma swarupini avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. What are the outcome of our broader discussion of nature nurture? The basic fact that best predicts of an adopted child personality or mental health are found in the biological parents he or she has never met, rather than in the adoptive parents who raised him or her, presents a significant challenge to purely environmental explanations of personality or psychology. The message is clear. You can't leave genes out of the equation. But keep in mind, no behavioral traits are completely inherited. So, you can't leave the environment out altogether either. Try to untangle the various nature nurture influences. Human behavior can be messy, and often common sense notions can get in the way of good science. One very significant contribution of behavioral genetics that has changed psychology for good can be very helpful to keep in mind. When your subjects are biologically related, no matter how clearly a situation may seem to point to environmental influence, it is never safe to interpret a behavior as wholly the result of nurture without further evidence. For example, when presented with data showing that children whose mothers read to them often are likely to have better reading scores in third grade, it is tempting to conclude that reading to your kids out loud is important to success in school. This may well be true, but the study as described is inconclusive because there are genetic as well as environmental genetic pathways between the parents, practices of mothers, and the attitude abilities of the children. This is a case where correlation does not imply causation, as they say. To establish that reading aloud causes success, a scientist can either study the problem in adaptive families or by finding a way to randomly assign children to oral reading conditions. The nature versus nurture debate is scientific, cultural, and philosophical debate about whether human culture, human behavior, and human personality are caused primarily by nature or nurture. Nature is often defined in this debate as genetic or hormone based behaviors, traits, and dispositions, while nurture is most commonly defined as environment, culture, and experience. What is the history of nature versus nurture? Let us find out. The nature versus nurture debate is an ongoing one. The modern debate often centers around the effect genes have on human disposition as opposed to the influences that early environment and development might have. As culture changes, so have popular understandings of this debate. In the 1960s, for example, psychologists and pop culture in general were heavily influenced by the theories of behaviorism. This theory led to the widespread belief what that human personality is primarily influenced by experience and training. It was during this time that researcher John Money attempted to demonstrate that gender was a product of early conditioning by raising a boy whose circumcision was botched as a girl. His experiment seemed successful in the beginning, but ultimately was a utterly failure. In recent years, the nature side of the debate has gained more attention, with headlines trumpeting newly discovered genes for virtually every behavior. Evolutionary psychology and sociology are two branches of science that attempt to demonstrate the evolutionary roots of human behavior. Books authored by scientists in these fields are extremely popular. How nature affects mental health is one of the reasons. While nature or genetics has been proven to be an important factor in the development of some mental health conditions, such as bipolar and major depression, the development of mental illness is not entirely genetic. Nature or genetics and disposition has been proven to be an important factor in the development of some mental health conditions, such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and major depression. Bipolar, for example, is 4 to 6 times more likely to develop when there is a family history of the condition. This indicates that nature, while it plays an important role, is not the only contributing factor. Then, how nurture affects mental health? Answer. Certain genetic factors may create a predisposition for a particular illness, but the probability that a person develops that illness depends in a part on environment, mean nurture. When a genetic variant indicates the possibility of developing a mental illness, this information can be used to direct positive behavior in such a way that the condition may not develop or may develop with less severity. James Fallon, he is one of the neuroscientists. He discovered that he had the brain of psychopath. He has stated that he believes growing up in a nurturing and loving environment helped him become a successful adult and may have been effective at preventing him from fully developing traits of psychopathy. Similarly, the basis for addiction is not thought to be entirely genetic by most researchers. Environmental aspects such as the habits of parents, habits of friends, or a partner might also be significant factors contributing to the development of an addiction, whatever the addiction it may be. Alcohol, smoking, or tobacco chewing, whatever. But a genetic predisposition to alcohol addiction may be far more significant if one is routinely exposed to binge drinking or other forms of alcohol abuse and comes to you this is as a normal alcohol use. Researchers at the University of Liverpool found that while a family history of mental health condition was the second strongest predictor, was in fact life events and experiences such as childhood bullying, abuse, or other trauma. This supports the idea that nurture plays one of the significant role in the development of mental health issues. Now, nature versus nurture in therapy. How it can be defined? In the mental health field, some therapeutic treatments and approaches may be nature based or nurture based, depending on which paradigm to which they adhere. For example, an extremely nature based approach might seek to address mental health on a biological or genetic level, while a nature based approach could be more likely to address a person's learned beliefs and behaviors. Most approaches borrow from both nature and nurture based philosophies, and many seek to address the interaction between nature and also nurture. For example, using medication to treat mental health issue may be a primarily nature based approach, while behavioral therapy, which stems from behaviorist psychology, addresses a person upbringing and conditioning and takes a nurture based point of view. Meanwhile, therapies based in cognitive psychology may be more likely to address the effects of both nature as well as nurture. It is possible to find a therapist who takes a more nature or nurture based approach of treatment. However, many therapists today consider multiple factors, including how the nature and nurture work together during a session. Now, how nature and nurture interact to be known. Let us go through. Many scientists eschew the nature versus nurture debate by emphasizing nature or nurture. In this schema, nature and nurture are inseparable, cannot be separated. Some genes, for example, cannot be activated without certain environmental inputs. The development of vision is a prime example of this. People cannot develop normal sight without exposure to visual stimuli. Similarly, some environmental inputs may be undermined by some genes. For example, some lifelong smokers, they are called chain smokers, means continuously smoking. Chain smokers may never experience smoking related illness, and this may be due to, at least in part, to their genes. Generally, it occurs. Some addictions start from hereditary, smoking like this, drinking something. Some genes may not work out for this. Environmental toxins may alter the expression of some genes, and genes for many behaviors presumed to have a genetic basis have not been discovered. Developmental system theory, among other theories, presents an alternative to this debate that does not require scientists to advocate either for nature or nurture. In the history of psychology, no other questions are central to the age old nature nurture debate. We are so concerned with nature nurture because our very sense of moral character seems to depend on it. While we may admire the athletic skills of a great basketball player, we think of his height as simply as a gift, a payoff in the genetic lottery. For the same reason, no one blames a short person for his height or someone's congenital disability on poor decisions. To test the obvious, it's not their fault. But we do praise the concert violinist for her dedication, just as we condemn cheaters, slackers, and bullies for their bad behavior. The problem is, most human characteristics are not usually as clear cut as height or instrument mastery. Affirming our nature nurture expectations strongly one way or the other. In fact, even the great violinist might have some inborn qualities, perfect pitch or long, nimble fingers that support and rewards her hard work. And the basketball player might have eaten a diet while growing up that promoted his genetic tendency for being tall. When we think about our control in others, and often the traits that don't seem to have an obvious cause are the ones that concern us the most and are far more personally significant. Let us find out similarities between nature and nurture through child development. As researchers develop deeper into nature versus nurture, child development that were once thought to be determined by child's environment also have a genetic component, whereas others that were believed to be controlled solely by hereditary or greatly influenced by external factors. Today's parent explains that many past studies on the effects of a child's experiences and environment are flawed because it is impossible for researchers to effectively control for genetics. Conversely, studies that claim parenting has not at all having impact on a child's development ignore the vital role that parents play in encouraging the best qualities, attributes, and behaviors in their children and discouraging harmful or negative behaviors. Now, nature versus nurture influences impacting child development. Genes determine certain human characteristics such as eye and hair color and the incidence of genetic diseases. However, most human traits, including life expectancy, height, and weight, have both an environmental and genetic component. For example, social learning theory states that Children learn by observing the behavior of others. So, parenting styles and the child's learned experiences determine whether they behave politely or aggressively in specific situations. By contrast, learning's genetics component encompasses the biological foundation of cognitive processes as explained in Frontiers in Psychology. Genetic and epigenetic contributions to the learning process are inheritable and interact with behavioral learning such as study habits and the availability of educational resources. Again, nature versus nurture. How both contribute to child development? Answer. The field of behavioral genetics studies how nature and nurture combine to affect a child's development. It states that while genetics have a greater overall impact on a person's makeup than their family environment does, most often individuals' behavioral traits cannot be traced to specific genes or family characteristics. Instead, each human behavioral trait is associated with a great number of genetic variants, each of which contributes a very small amount to the expression of the trait. Now, let us find out the differences between nature and nurtures. Within the complex relationship between a child's genetic makeup and learned experiences, distinctions can be drawn between the human traits that children are born with and those that result from their environment. The differences are evident where in activities, what are the activities such as sleeping, crying, eating, socializing, and moving, all of which have clear nature and nurture components, as First Cry Parenting explains. Now, nature. Genetic and hereditary influences. How showed its importance on this nature? Now we can come to the detailed description. A study of fraternal and identical twins found that babies' sleeping patterns are determined primarily by genetics. Similarly, 60% of babies' temperament is set by their genetic makeup. Whether they are sociable or shy is also primarily driven by genes. Therefore, we used to see some children in the school. Some will be active, some will be inactive. Some will be moderative, some will be pessimistic. Why it happens? When we see generally in the house the father or mother will be like this. The influence had fallen on the child. Therefore, the child acts like this. It is also a kind of genetic reason. Also controlled primarily by heredity and or the foods a baby prefers and whether the baby is active or sedentary. Now, environmental influences of nurture. While genetics are key drivers of these and other aspects of child's development, that development is also influenced by what babies experience. For example, we can find out it from the early childhood. Babies with poor sleep patterns can benefit from being exposed to sunlight during the day and by parents establishing a bedtime routine that induces better sleep. Whether a baby is easy to calm and soothe when crying is determined by genes. But swaddling, rocking, swaying, and other activities help overcome this genetic predisposition. Now, nature's biological psychology nurtures behaviorism. Biological psychology examines thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from a psychological perspective, as very well mind describes. The field studies how a person's brain, nervous system, hormones, and other physical features affect behavior. It also studies the mechanisms of inheritance via genes on the behavioral likeness of identical twins, for example. Conversely, behaviorism considers how interaction with the environment can condition behavior. This field considers only observable behavior, believing that moods, cognition, and emotions are too subjective to be measurable. Types of conditioning which pairs a neutral stimulus with a naturally occurring stimulus until each evokes the same response, and operant or instrumental conditioning which uses reinforcements and punishments to evoke the desired behavior. Now, nature's scientific influences similarly nurtures social construct. One is science, one is social. While, while approaching to child development that emphasize nature over nurture may appear to be more grounded in the science than in behavior modification. Both nature and nurture have scientific foundations that are paired with environmental controls. In general, nature looks at the impact of such physical approaches as neurotransmitters, neurotransmitters, and genome sequencing on child's development, while nurture focuses on aspects such as peer pressure and social influences. The nature versus nurture debate is one of the oldest philosophical issues within psychology. So, what exactly is it all about? Nature refers to all of the genes and hereditary factors that influence who we are, from our physical appearances to our personality characteristics. Nurture refers to all the environmental variables that impact who we are, including our early childhood experiences, how we are raised, our social relationships, and our surrounding culture. Even today, different branches of psychology often take a one versus the other approach. For example, biological psychology tends to stress the importance of genetics and biological influences. Behaviorism, on the other hand, focuses on the impact that environmental has on behavior. In the past, debates over the relative contributions of nature versus nurture often take a very one sided approach, with one side arguing that nature played a major role in this regard. It was nurture that was the most insignificant. Today, most experts recognize that both factors play a critical role. Not only that, but they also realize that nature and nurture interact in important ways all throughout life. Advocates of this point of view believe that all of our characters and everything will be deployed to find out the results. Genetic trials handed down from parents influence the individual differences that make each person unique. ओम श्री कांताय कल्याण निधे निधे धनाम श्री वेंकटनिवासाय श्रीनिवासाय मंगलम मंगलाशास्त्रपरे पदाचार्य प्रोगमैः सर्वैश्च पूर्वैराचार्यै सत्कृतायास्तु मंगलम्.